Nice to meet you all. Just a preliminary test. So if I say voluntary carbon market, can you raise your hand if you think you are quite familiar with the concept? Oh. Kind of better than usually. So I'm used to it, don't worry. I'm first going to give a few words about where I'm coming from, where I'm speaking from. So that's the one. I work in GERES, which is an NGO specialized in energy transition. We work mostly in Africa, Central Asia, and Southeast Asia on all topics related to sustainable energy development, energy efficiency, energy access to underserved people or areas, all those kind of matters. And we also have been involved in what we call climate solidarity for many years. Just a few words of what we believe in. Well, of course, we believe in energy transition. That's why we're there. We believe it is only going to work if we make it fair for all territories, for all communities. And we also are very attached to working internationally, but also in France. We have projects in the southeast of France in particular, on the agriculture, on energy efficiency of housing in Marseille, and that's a big topic in the coming years with the rise of temperatures in the city. We have like a small model. We use the donut of Kate Raworth that I'm sure most of you are familiar with, but kind of applied to energy for us. And to contribute to find this safe and just space under the ecological ceiling and above the social floor. And we contribute with those different expertise that I have mentioned. Voilà, so that's for GERES. For a number of years, and because we have been working on carbon finance really since the beginning of the carbon offsetting mechanisms, we started to collaborate, in particular with ADEME, to promote more clarity, more understanding of these mechanisms, and also to try to promote good practices. Because as as it was introduced by Hervé, we have big problems of not very good practices in this market. So we pilot a platform which is called Info Contribution Carbone in French. Used to be named Info Compensation Carbone, but we made a small change, and I'll come back to it afterwards. And you see, we mostly produce content for a varied public. It can be territories, it can be companies that are interested in investing in the market. It can be project leaders that are looking for help in order to develop their projects. Yes, and I forgot to say something important, which is one thing we do is an annual survey where we have, using the contacts we have with a large number of operators, credit carbon operators in France. Thank you very much. So, thank you. Credit carbon operators that operate in France, they are not necessarily French. They can promote projects that are elsewhere in the world. They can sell to customers that are not French, but they have some kind of operation in the French market. So all of those operators, we make an annual poll, and it allows us to produce this document that you see the cover of the latest one, which gives an overview on the market, which is not perfect. I've noticed we have similar figures with Alan, but not always the same exactly. But I think the orders of scales are quite satisfactory. Okay, so let's go into the VCM. Not going really. Okay. So this one I'm going to go fast because this I think you are familiar with. Okay. So the common objective that we'll all have here is to try to reach carbon neutrality overall at the planet level, we would say. Okay, either through reduction or either through séquestration, we say in French, okay, increase in carbon sinks. This, at the corporate level, declines also, it also can be looked after by companies. They also can try to reduce emissions directly or indirectly with their other members of their value chain, with the kind of products they propose to customers, and they also can invest in carbon sinks, okay? But one of the important messages that we try to communicate on carbon markets is that you cannot claim carbon neutrality at a corporate level. Okay, we will go back to this afterwards, but that's one of the big problems today, that you see many companies arguing that their activity is carbon neutral, okay, because they claim they help to reduce elsewhere, okay, and they put this at the same level as their own carbon production, GHG emissions. So this is one of the drawbacks of using this term of compensation that has been very useful to, I would say, provide a dynamic to this market. But sometimes there is really a lot of abuse with this term, and this is the reason we have shifted to this term of contribution now. But you will hear carbon compensation a lot still, and myself sometimes I use the word, so it's not also dramatic. So first thing about what is VCM is what it is not, okay? People tend to confuse it mostly with carbon taxes, okay? So carbon taxes are when a state or a community of states, like in the European Union, okay, imposes taxes on products or services that you will use, and those products, when they have been built or when they are transported or distributed, they correspond to carbon emissions. So this is what you are going to try to put a price on, those negative externalities that you mentioned, that the market doesn't really take in charge. It is also different from carbon quotas, so maybe you have heard about that as well. Carbon quotas is a system, a regulated system, okay, where you have a number of sectors, let's say, for example, the chemical sector in Europe, okay, that they have what we call rights to pollute, okay. So this is an old mechanism that existed for other types of pollutions for many years. But in the case of carbon, you have these rights to pollute that can be exchanged, which means if I have an industrial company who has managed to improve a lot its processes, and maybe they will be well under their quota of emission, okay, they could sell, okay, these savings to another industrial company that maybe has not achieved its targets, okay. Carbon, those markets are closed. It means you cannot use credit carbons generally on the open market that we are going to speak about now to comply with your regulation obligations. Okay, is that clear so far? Okay. If I'm going too slow, you can tell as well. Oh, okay. Just a little bit of history. So where, I'm sorry, just a second. Okay, okay, just checking the next one. So maybe some of you know that 1992 is the creation of the UNFCCC, that in French we call the CNUC, right? Okay, and where all the countries, many countries, I think 172 today, are parties, okay? And that was the beginning of the official climate change fight, let's say. And after this summit in 1997, the Kyoto Protocol was the first really international regulation where countries started to have commitments in terms of carbon reductions. And already in 1997, were introduced those what we call flexibility mechanisms, okay, that allow countries and companies to invest in carbon reduction or sinks elsewhere in other parts of the world. Already with this idea that enabling these financial flows, mostly north to south, would be beneficial in climate change. So there were two kinds of mechanisms. The clean development mechanism that was supposed to be from developed countries to less developed countries, and the joint implementation whereby you could participate in a low carbon project in an industrialized country. Okay, those mechanisms were supervised by UNFCCC, so it was not unregulated as the voluntary carbon market that we are going to speak about just after. The GI were the origin of the later quota markets. Okay, they were continued by the quota markets, like the European quota market, but you also have one, for instance, in California or other parts of the world. And the CDMs, they started to be active in the years 2000, but then there was kind of a regulatory freeze, okay? Countries were not able to agree on a continuation of the Kyoto Protocol. So you spoke about market failure earlier. Here we had kind of a regulatory failure, okay? And this is one of the explanation, okay, of the rise of the voluntary carbon market. So the main difference is that in the voluntary carbon market, a company can invest in carbon reduction, for instance, somewhere in the world, okay? But the word voluntary is key, so the company has the choice. It's her own decision. It's related to her carbon reduction strategy in general, okay? They are not submitted to any form of regulation. That's why it's called voluntary, okay? In 2015, in the Paris Agreement, the flexibility mechanisms went back in the text, okay? So there is an Article 6 that provides a certain number of provisions to introduce, again, some mechanisms at UNFCCC level between countries, between northern countries and southern countries and other kind of possibilities. I will go fast here. because we don't have so much time. But today, the implementation of those articles is still in discussion. Okay, so it is not fully implemented. So we still don't really have a regulated flexibility mechanism that can be used at the global level. So the voluntary carbon market still is, as of today, the only mechanism that allows those transfers of carbon credits. So let's now just briefly explain what is, what is this market. So you have on the left hand, okay, I say company a lot, okay, but the buyers of carbon credits can be you and me, can be an association, can be a town, okay, anyone. Most of these organizations, they will measure their carbon emissions. They will have a plan to reduce those emissions, okay, so they will try to reduce, okay. And at least for a while, they will probably have remaining emissions, okay? And the idea of the VCM, and you see I wrote here compensation again, okay, is that you will try to help reaching global carbon neutrality, okay, by financing at least at the same level as your remaining carbon, okay, projects elsewhere, okay, that can provide carbon reduction, avoidance, and you see there are small symbols of type of projects, or the most well-known by the public are forest projects, okay, but you have, you will see afterwards, other types of projects. You can invest in renewable energy, in household equipment that are energy efficient, various type of projects, okay? These projects, they are supposed to follow a number of criteria. They can be labeled by independent certification mechanisms, okay? So they can issue what we call carbon credit, okay? One carbon credit is actually 1 ton of carbon equivalent saved, okay? Okay, do you see the principle? Yeah. Yes, just to finish this principles part. When you have a project, okay, you will make projections. So that's one of the big deals in the carbon voluntary market, is that you make projections. And of course, projections are always difficult to perform correctly, okay? But you will try to measure, okay, the difference in situation between what we call the reference scenario, that is what happens without the project in this territory, for instance, and what happens with the project, okay? And these differences are the reductions that can be the basis of the carbon credit, okay? That's the end of the introduction. I like this picture because it kind of shows the two big problems that we have. There are many problems, but I would say the two main ones, okay? The first one is the buyers. Oh, doesn't work. The laser doesn't work anymore, I think. I've killed the laser. I'm sorry. Well, okay. So the buyer doesn't have a honest reduction policy, okay? He's, he's kind of arguing that since he's planting a tree, okay, so that's really the caricature, okay? He doesn't have to make any effort, and you see he produces more and more smoke, okay? So he's not reducing his own emissions, okay? And the other side, okay, is that the projects are uncertain, okay? So their uncertainty is variable. Thank you very much. Ah, d'accord. Parce que ça avance pas du coup? Ah oui, ça va devenir compliqué là, je pense que... Déjà avec les 2 orties, c'est difficile, merci. Merci quand même. Yeah, so for a number of type of projects, you do have a lot of uncertainties, okay? And if you do not include in your carbon pricing, in your audit practices, etc., these uncertainties, okay, it will result. The results of the project will be well under what was sold, okay. So now let's see how the VCM tries to work better than that. Okay, this slide, I'm going to go fast because Alan, I know, is going back to it. But I'll just mention here that for most certification standards, and I will come back to these standards just after, you have 4 main criteria that have to be applied to the different projects, okay? Additionality, which basically means that without the finance, the carbon finance, the project either is not economically viable or at least it cannot be developed at the scale that is projected, okay? So additionality means that really finance, carbon finance helps, okay? It's not, how do you say effet d'aubaine in English? Opportunity effect? Yeah, something like that. You get it? Yeah, okay. Windfall effect, yeah, that's the one. Thank you. Okay. Well, the second one, it seems obvious, but of course very important, is that really you measure as much as you can the reductions that you are trying to produce. Unicity is that you are not going to sell 2 carbon credits on the same carbon ton of reduction to 2 different buyers. Okay, so there are registers that allow the unicity of these reduction transfers. And it has to be regularly verified, audited. Okay, and the last one, permanence. I think Alan will come back to it, in particular in the agricultural context, which is really the challenge of being able really for a long period of time to sustain your reduction claims. So those standards I was mentioning, since you understand that for many years this carbon market developed without a strong, I would say, regulatory framework, a number of initiatives, non-for-profit, okay, developed, a lot of them, as you can see, okay. I've squared in red some of the most famous internationally, Vera and Gold Standard, and in France, the label Carbone, okay, that arrived, laser is back. You see in 2018, okay, so much more recent, that one. So you have some are specialized on certain type of activities like forestry or and some like Vera and Gold Standard really tackle a very large number of projects, types of projects, okay? The little picture is a GERES project, okay? We distribute, for instance, in Mali, in Africa, improved systems of cooking, cook stoves, okay, that are much more energy efficient. So usually those population, they tend to lower, well, the idea is that they would lower their pressure on the, for instance, native forest, okay, because they will need less wood. And also it's much better in terms of health, Okay. Well, so voilà. So on the paper, it's beautiful. Then one of the problem with those kind of household equipments, not so much with the cook stoves, but a lot with heating efficiency, is what we call the rebound effect. Yeah. Okay, so people, they will have a more efficient system, but instead of lowering their consumption, okay, they will want maybe to have the better temperature, okay, more comfortable, so they will use as much oil or whatever as before. So this has to be taken into account in the methodologies. So I just mentioned the low carbon label, label bas carbone in France, okay. It's not a very common type of framework in the world, okay, that really managed by the French ministry, okay, with methodologies that are proposed by private parties, okay, but their adoption go through a process supervised by the ministry with public consultations, etc., okay. To date, there are 15 methods validated. Most of them are in agriculture and forest, okay, but there are some, for instance, most recent one in a building sector with biosource materials, and those are kind of gaining momentum. The level price, we'll come back to this afterwards, but just to give you an idea, for the low carbon label in France, 33.5 euros per ton equivalent of carbon, and the world market average is more around 8, okay? So it's significantly higher. But of course, the step to be labeled, etc., is much higher, and so there are related costs. Okay, in our annual poll, okay, this year we had 60% of respondents that were kind of satisfied of the, I would say, image of the label bas carbone for financiers. Yeah, okay. So this is just a small scheme just to show you the players in the voluntary carbon market. So the projects, of course, this is a basis. So you have a project developer. Sometimes you have what we call mandataire in French that will help the developer to subscribe to administrative obligations, typically, okay? Very often you have a carbon operator, okay? They will help, because if you are a farmer, for instance, usually you are not very familiar with carbon measurement or able to find the right solutions. So some of them can be very specialized. Some of them are more like brokers, okay? They will buy carbon credits from operators or directly, okay? And here at the end, you have the customers. As you can see, there are very different means to reach those customers, okay? I do know of some, for instance, forestry projects, okay, that work directly with a nearby company, okay? There are no intermediates at all. Of course, if you remove intermediates, the advantage is that you may have more money going to the project than to all those people, okay? But those people provide services, of course. Okay, you see the picture of the main players in the market? Okay. We are going to, I know when in the table ronde afterwards, there will be really concrete examples of how you put those projects into practice. So I don't want to spend too much time on this one. But main steps usually, okay, you will study the carbon situation of the project you imagine, okay. You will have to go through project certification process, for instance, because today in the market, projects without certifications of any form, they have very little chances to find customers, okay? So this can be very long, okay? If you want to get a gold standard certification, even if you followed an established methodology, it's like 3 to 6 months minimum, okay? And of course, investments. Then of course you will implement the activities, okay? And you need to monitor them. In most methodologies, there are audits planned. And when you do all of this right, okay, there still has to, those carbon credits, they have to find their buyers, okay? Yeah? You have questions on this? No? Okay. Okay, now I'm going to give some key figures. How am I with the time?
You have about 5 minutes.
Okay. So let's give quickly some figures. So the figures I will give now are from our annual study, okay? So this is not the total amount of tons sold in the world, okay? This is the scope of our study, okay? It's not ridiculous at the world level. Maybe it's like 10–15% of the VCM, okay? So I think it's kind of representative. So I'm sorry, the police is a little bit bizarre. But something maybe I can point out. But so this is the operators we survey. The figures I'm going to show are from 2023, okay? So it's from January to December 2023, okay? When I say the market is contracting, it's compared to 2022, okay? In 2022, the impact of the big scandals that we had 2–3 years ago in the Guardian, in the researcher community, etc., they had not reached their full impact, okay? Their full impact was the first semester of 2023, where really the market really had a significant drop, okay? End of 2023 and beginning of this year, it has started to go up again, okay? Voilà. But still the market has contracted a lot in 2023. But an interesting thing is that the price has continued to grow, okay? So it's not very high, of course. Yeah. But the average used to be something like 5.5, I think, in 2021, 6.2 in 2022, and 8.05 last year. So this average figure is, you have to be very aware that actually today in the market, there are kind of two markets, okay? There is one market that is low price carbon, okay? So a big volume of not very good quality carbon credits. Like, most of them are under 5 euros per ton, okay? And a high level market, okay? I spoke about 35 euros for label bas carbone, okay? But you even have, with very specific kind of products, you have very high prices, okay? So what type of projects? We already mentioned some, okay? Here you see that renewable, people always think that this is the first one. It's not. Forestry. I think the PowerPoint it will be available. Huh? But I do the same. I also take pictures of the PowerPoints. Don't worry. So this actually is the first one, renewable energies. Okay, forest is a big one. Okay, this one is small. Is very small here, but it was 0.2 last year. Okay, so it's growing, and in France in particular. Okay. Water, voilà. And here you have the main standards, as seen from France, okay? Gold standard is the one that was the most affected in 2023, but one of the reasons is that they for a number of months, they stopped the certification of a number of projects because after the scandals, they wanted to revise some methodologies. So there was kind of a halt a little bit in gold standard, okay? And what we observe, okay, besides those big ones, is that there are more and more alternative standards that continue to emerge, specialized in some sectors. I like to show those ones that we have in the polls every year, that the operators that work on this market are aware that its reputation is kind of bad, okay? Well, most of them do believe that what they do is useful for climate change. It's good for their psychological health, okay? But they are aware, and they are really, most of those that I know, they're really invested in trying to bring the market up in terms of quality. The criteria for the buyers, first one is the price. Second one, going up, is the location of the project. I want to support projects that are in my environment, or if I am in an international company, it can be where I have a subsidiary, for instance. And the third criteria are co-benefits, social and environmental. Co-benefits are really a particular topic because what operators say is that now is almost a must for the buyers, except a few buyers that are only driven by the price, okay? But for the others, it's kind of a must, but they do not take it into account very much in the price. So they want it, but they don't pay for it. Yeah? Okay. I'm finishing. Yeah. Little focus in France now, okay? In our study, the projects in France are 2.5%, okay? So it's very small, okay? It was 2% the year before, okay? So there is an increase. And something which is interesting, because it is not at all the ratio that you find internationally, it's a big part of the projects that are labeled bas carbone. So label bas carbone is not all the French market. Hein? Label bas carbone is 500,000 tons, and the French market is a little more, you see. Okay, there are independent standards, there are other methodologies. But what is interesting is there is a lot of pre-financing. Okay? And the type of projects here are the main methodologies that are developed under. So this is label bas carbone only, hein? Okay? So you see there is a lot of forest, okay? I had written, I'm going to try to remember, the agricultural projects, okay, they are much smaller, but they are really gaining momentum, okay? Grande culture, I don't know if the translation is correct, but I don't think so. Grande culture, I think last year I had 13, and now it's 72, okay? This I had 15, verger, hein, 70 now. Here I had 3, now it's 6. So it's growing, okay? And that's, I think, is my last slide. Just a quick look on forestry, because I know Alan is going to speak a lot about agriculture. Something I wanted to underline on forestry is that there is a good, I think, rate of return in general for the project leaders. 71% of the produce of selling the credits goes back to the person that works in the forest. Okay, so this is quite good. Okay, and apparently it is not as difficult as in other sectors. Okay, to find financing. Okay, and one last word about biodiversity. This year it's the first year we asked this question, so we didn't have many responses, but those that responded, they say that they really are trying to implement the biodiversity practices that are recommended in the label Bas Carbone, okay? And it doesn't seem to be really a price motivation, okay? They really say that it's really added value for them to explain to their buyers that the projects will be more sustainable in the long term if they respect those criteria. Voilà, I think I'm done.